For this dataset, if you are interested in the sum of AD syringe recorded, AD syringe used, and AD syringe returned for each state, there are a number of approaches to use. One approach is to sort the data by the state field, then apply the subtotal command on the outline group of the data tab. When you apply the subtotal command, you will have to select these three fields and apply the sum function. Alternatively, you could use a pivot table. A pivot table is very flexible when it comes to summarizing data. To use a pivot table on your dataset, make sure you select a cell within the dataset. On the Tables group of the Insert tab, click on the Pivot Table command to launch the Create Pivot Table dialog box. At this point, you may run into some problems if your dataset contains merged cells or empty cells, depending on the version of Microsoft Office Excel you are using. Generally, it is best practice to ensure that there are no merged cells and empty cells have values that represent not available data. On the Create Pivot Table dialog box, choose the data that you want to analyze. You can select a table or a range, or you can use an external data source. Next, choose where you want the pivot table report to be placed. It could be on a new worksheet or in the existing worksheet. If you choose existing worksheet, then you can select a location where you want the pivot table in the existing worksheet. If you are analyzing data from multiple sources or multiple tables, then you can add those data to the data model. When you have set your preferences here, click OK. A pivot table have been created on a new worksheet. In addition, the pivot table fields pane have been opened. On the pivot table fields pane, you are provided with all the fields in the data associated with this pivot table. To create pivot table reports from the associated data, you will have to drag fields from the field area to any of these four labeled areas, depending on the report you want to create. Even if you are not sure which report you want to create, you can move fields around until you get a report that looks like what you want. To create a report that summarizes the sum of AD syringe recorded, AD syringe used, and AD syringe returned for each state, I'll drag the state field to the rows area. Next, I'll drag the AD syringe recorded to the values area. I'll drag the AD syringe used to the values area and drag the AD syringe returned also to the values area. This is the summary I am interested in. You can view the same summary for the local government areas in each state if you drag the LGA field to the rows area. If you expand a state, you will be provided with the same summary for the local government areas in that state. If you like, you can collapse it. You may end up doing something like this. Or this. If you don't like what you have generated, you can just move the field away from the labeled areas to remove it. Although we are interested in the sum of AD syringe returned, nothing stops us from finding the average of AD syringe returned. To change sum of AD syringe returned to average of AD syringe returned, on the values area, scroll down to the field sum of AD syringe returned. Click on the drop down at the right end of the field and select value field setting. Here, you can provide a custom name for the field on the pivot table. Alternatively, you can change the function with which to summarize the field. Let's change sum to average. Then click OK. I'll change that back to sum. Whenever you activate a pivot table, you will launch the Contextual Analyze and Design tabs for pivot table tools. On the Contextual Design tab, you are provided with options for the layout and style of the pivot table. And on the Contextual Analyze tab, you are provided with tools to carry your analysis further. For example, we may be interested in finding out if the difference between the sum of AD syringe recorded and the sum of AD syringe used is the same as the sum of AD syringe returned. This requires that we create a calculated field that presents the difference between AD syringe recorded and AD syringe used. We will then use that difference to compare with the sum of AD syringe returned. To insert a calculated field in this pivot table, on the Calculations group of the Contextual Analyze tab for pivot table tools, click on Fields, Terms, and Sets command. Then select Calculated Field. On the Insert Calculated Field dialog box, provide a name for the field you want to create. I'll name this field Recorded minus Used. Next, I will provide the formula for the field. The formula is AD syringe recorded minus AD syringe used. And that's it. I'll click OK. From this data, it is clear that in Adamawa state, for example, the sum of AD syringe returned is the same as the sum of the recorded minus used AD syringe. This is not the case for Jigawa and Kaduna, for example. One thing we may want to do is to find out the difference between the sum of recorded minus used and the sum of AD syringe returned.